Late at night, deep in the silent woods, the wind whispered through the dry branches, creaking like the earth itself was sighing. Khadidja O, a 2-3-year-old woman, stumbled along the gravel path, her trembling hand clutching a phone long since dead. Pale moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting ghostly shadows across her frightened face. Her eyes darted in every direction, desperate to find an unseen way out of the suffocating darkness. Somewhere behind her, the faint crack of a twig made her freeze, her heart pounding so hard it nearly drowned out her breath. She turned, only to see her own shadow stretching long across the damp earth. Far ahead, the dim headlights of a Mercedes cut weakly through the night, like cold eyes watching her every move. She called out a name, her voice hoarse and breaking, but the only reply was the sound of wind sweeping through the tall weeds. The air was thick with the smell of damp decay and metal. A violent premonition crawled up her spine, urging her to run, but her legs felt trapped by an invisible terror. Crack! Another footstep, heavier, slower, approached from behind. She spun around, mouth open to scream, but before a sound escaped, a flash of steel glimmered in the darkness. A strangled cry tore the silence, and then nothing. Blood slowly spread beneath the cold moonlight, staining the roots of a tree where a night bird had just sung its last song. A few hours later, in a quiet riverside neighborhood along the Danube in Ingolstadt, the blue and red lights of police cars flickered across the still surface of the water. In a narrow alleyway, the parents of Sharaban K collapsed beside their daughter's familiar silver Mercedes. The car door hung slightly open. Inside lay the body of a young woman, her face so brutally disfigured it was beyond recognition. The mother clung to the car door, screaming her daughter's name in a broken, gut-wrenching voice. The father stood motionless, his trembling hands resting on the blood-streaked hood. Neighbors gathered nearby, their eyes wide with fear, whispers spreading like a swarm of startled bees. Everyone believed it was a tragedy, a young woman viciously murdered. But no one yet knew that within hours, the truth about the body inside that car would send chills through all of Germany, a story that would expose the darkest corners of human nature, where obsession, deception, and death intertwine. My friends, before we continue, take a moment to ask yourself this. Are you truly safe in a world where every connection begins with a single tap on a screen? A friendly invitation? A free gift? A harmless meeting? Could any of these be the doorway to something far darker? The story of Khadidja O that we're about to uncover is not just a crime. It's a chilling warning to anyone living in the age of social media, where beauty and trust can be twisted, manipulated, and weaponized in the most merciless ways. Think about it. Murdering someone to take their place sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But when it happens in real life, in the heart of a modern and civilized Germany, it becomes a chilling reminder of how far a person can go to escape from themselves. Can you believe that? Share your thoughts below. Is trust on the internet still safe? Or are we trading our lives for a simple follow? If this story sends chills down your spine, share it, because maybe, just maybe, one person warned could be one tragedy prevented. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to keep following these haunting true stories where every lesson is written in blood and tears. Now, take a deep breath and come with me back to that fateful night when Khadidja's death began to unravel a monstrous exchange of identities, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Khadidja O, a 2-3-year-old woman of Algerian descent, lived in the city of Heilbronn, in the German state of Baden-Württemberg. She had a bright face, deep dark eyes, and a gentle smile that made anyone who met her instantly feel at ease. She was a beloved beauty blogger on Instagram, often sharing makeup tutorials, skincare routines, and messages of positivity. Her online work provided a steady income through brand collaborations and cosmetic sponsorships, and she was gradually carving out her own space in the beauty community. Friends described Khadidja as the kind of person who always checked in when someone was going through a tough time, someone who could make you feel lighter just by talking for a few minutes. At 23, she was independent, yet full of dreams, her future still wide open, her path just beginning to unfold. No one could have imagined how suddenly and mysteriously those peaceful days would come to an end. Khadidja had no enemies, no debts, no ties to any trouble. So when the tragedy struck, her friends were stunned. They couldn't understand how such a kind, gentle girl could become the target of such cruelty. All anyone knew was that, just days before she went missing, Khadidja had received a collaboration offer from another woman working in the beauty industry. It seemed harmless, even promising the kind of opportunity any influencer would welcome. That woman was Sharaban K, 24, from Munich, with Middle Eastern roots. Some sources said she was Iraqi. Others claimed she was of Iranian descent. She had once worked in the cosmetics field and was somewhat familiar with the online world, seemingly eager for fame. Some described her as meticulous, ambitious, desperate for recognition. Others recalled a woman in decline, recently unemployed, trapped in personal turmoil, often appearing exhausted and lost. No one truly knew who Sharaban was beneath the surface. There was something in her eyes, a mix of darkness and restless tension that lingered with anyone who met her. Some said she had family conflicts, even moments when she talked about wanting to leave everything behind. Rumors swirled that she'd once tried to find someone to take care of, an old dispute, as if there was always some hidden plan turning quietly inside her mind, one no one could quite comprehend. And then, somehow, fate drew the paths of Sharaban and Khadidja together, two young women, the same age, sharing the same passion, working in the same beauty industry. And, in a cruel twist of irony, they looked almost identical, so alike that at a glance, anyone could have mistaken them for twin sisters. That eerie resemblance would soon set off a chain of events no one could have imagined. One of them would walk into the darkness of that fateful night, and the other would leave an entire nation trembling, haunted by one chilling question. What exactly was she trying to escape? The summer of 2022 settled gently over Heilbronn, the air warm, sunlight spilling across the city's old cobblestone streets, where Khadidja O spent her days devoted to her craft as a beauty blogger. Most of her time was spent behind the camera, testing skincare products, perfecting every frame, replying to hundreds of messages each week. Her life revolved around beauty, brightness, and brand collaborations both big and small. Over time, her Instagram became a source of inspiration for many young women, and her inbox was constantly filled with messages from fans, companies, and fellow creators. Among those messages, one stood out in August that year. It was polite, professional, and carried an air of warmth. The sender introduced herself as Sharabi. She claimed to work in the beauty industry too, saying she had followed Khadidja's page for a long time and deeply admired her work. Sharabi offered a collaboration. She would send Khadidja a set of luxury cosmetics to try, photograph, and review honestly. For an influencer, it was a familiar and appealing opportunity. Everything in the message sounded reasonable, even trustworthy. Khadidja responded with quiet excitement, just as she had done countless times before. The two women began exchanging messages. Sharabi's tone was friendly yet professional, speaking with the kind of insight that made Khadidja feel understood and, most dangerously of all, safe. But what Khadidja didn't know was that behind the name Sharabi was no stranger in the beauty world. It was a carefully constructed identity, built after weeks of searching and screening. Later, investigators would uncover that this woman had contacted dozens of other young women on social media, all sharing a similar look. Long dark hair, lightly tanned skin, and striking Middle Eastern features. She had used multiple accounts, multiple names, and multiple approaches, sometimes posing as a collaborator, offering work, other times as a friendly admirer, sending thank you gifts. Most of her targets ignored or declined the offers. Only one responded, Khadidja. Perhaps Sharabi's words were too convincing, or perhaps her tone carried just the right blend of professionalism and charm to erase any trace of suspicion. On the 16th of August 2022, Khadidja woke earlier than usual, She chose a simple dress, applied a touch of makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection smiling softly in the afternoon light. Before leaving her small apartment in Eppingen, she sent a quick message to her best friend, saying she was about to meet a new beauty brand partner and would share how it went later that evening. The door closed behind her with a soft click, the sound of the lock echoing faintly down the quiet hallway. Everything seemed ordinary, except for one small detail. The Sharabi account had very few personal photos, mostly product images. Khadidja noticed it for a moment but brushed it off, reassuring herself that maybe the woman was simply new to the business. No one knew it then, but that was the last time Khadidja O was seen in the light. Late in the afternoon, the fading sunlight spread softly across the narrow street in front of Khadidja's home, glinting off the polished surface of a light-colored Mercedes that had just pulled up. The engine hummed quietly in the warm air. The window rolled down, revealing the face of a young woman with a bright smile and sharply lined eyes. "Khadidja?" Her voice was gentle, yet firm. She introduced herself as Sharaban, the new acquaintance from Instagram. Beside her, in the driver's seat, sat a young man with dark hair and a cold, unreadable face. His gaze slid over Khadidja, detached, as if he were simply fulfilling a task already decided long ago. His name was Shakir, the man Sharaban publicly called her close friend, though in truth, he was her secret boyfriend. Khadidja hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking between the two, before settling on Sharaban's face. Something made her pause, a strange, unsettling sense of déjà vu, as if she were staring into a mirror. The long black hair, the warm brown skin, the cheekbones, the lips, even the makeup style, everything looked eerily identical. She let out a small, awkward laugh. "We really do look alike," Sharaban smiled back, her voice soft, but her eyes deep and unblinking. "I was thinking the same thing." The car door closed behind Khadidja with a dry, final click, a sound that seemed to punctuate an invisible ending. The Mercedes eased forward, merging quietly into the sparse traffic, leaving the city center. The sky began to change color, the daylight fading into the soft gray of evening, and the scattered streetlights cast fleeting glows across the faces inside the car. One smiling, one silent, and one unreadable. Khadidja chatted brightly, her voice full of life as she talked about her work, how she had started from nothing, how she dreamed of launching her own beauty brand one day. Sharaban listened attentively, offering small compliments, asking thoughtful questions at just the right moments. Everything felt strangely normal. Then, gradually, the city slipped away behind them. The scene outside the window shifted from rows of buildings to dense stretches of forest, the lights thinning out until there was nothing but darkness and endless trees. Khadidja noticed the change, her unease quietly growing. "Are we almost there, Sharabi?" she asked, her tone soft but uneasy. "Almost," Sharaban replied, eyes still forward. "It's near Ingolstadt." Ingolstadt. The name caught in Khadidja's mind like a snagged thread. She knew it was hundreds of kilometers from Heilbronn. Why so far just to pick up a set of cosmetics? Why hadn't she mentioned this before? When she turned to look, Sharaban was still smiling, calm, composed, not the slightest hint of tension in her face. Beside her, in the driver's seat, Shakir said nothing. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his expression utterly blank, like a man driving not toward a destination, but toward inevitability. Dusk faded fast, leaving only a thin orange streak across the tree line. Inside the car, the air grew heavier, the silence so thick that Khadidja could hear the low hum of the engine and the faint rhythm of her own breath. When the road began to narrow, winding into a path surrounded by forest, Sharaban suddenly said, "I think there's a problem with the car. Shakir, can you pull over and check?" The Mercedes slowed, shuddered slightly, and came to a stop on the shoulder, where the ground was carpeted in dry leaves. Darkness crept in, swallowing the last trace of daylight. Khadidja glanced around. No houses, no lights, nothing but dense trees, and the damp scent of resin and earth. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Sharaban smiled faintly and opened the door. "Probably just a tire. Come, let's take a look." The door swung open with a soft thud, and the forest wind rushed in, carrying with it a strange chill that didn't belong to summer. In that fleeting moment, Khadidja didn't yet know that beyond the headlights spilling weakly across the wet road, the darkness around her was already waiting. All three stepped out of the car. The night wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the cold, damp scent of soil and sap. The air was thick, heavy, filled only with the sound of insects, and the fading echo of the tires, settling into stillness. Khadidja shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. She switched on her phone's flashlight, the thin beam sweeping over the uneven ground. Shakir crouched by the tire, pretending to inspect it. "Looks like a flat," he murmured, glancing up at Sharaban. "Grab the flashlight from the trunk." Sharaban nodded and walked around to the back of the car. Out of instinct, polite, helpful, unsuspecting, Khadidja followed, raising her phone to light the way for her new acquaintance. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Everything was still so still that she could hear the pounding of her own heart. Then, a sharp sound cut through the air. Thud! Like metal striking bone. The world tilted. A wave of dizziness hit her. Her vision went black. Pain exploded at the back of her head as her knees gave way. The phone slipped from her hand, its light tumbling across the ground before flickering out, plunging everything into darkness. "What are you doing?" she gasped, her voice trembling, breaking apart in the cold night air. But before there was an answer, a shadow moved. And then, another blow. Sharaban, or rather, whatever had taken over her, slipped out of the composed persona she'd worn until that moment, and became someone else entirely. Her long black hair tangled, her eyes wild. In her hand glinted a knife, the steel catching a stray beam from the car's headlights. Without hesitation, she brought the blade down, then again, a third time. Khadidja's scream ripped through the night. She thrashed, trying to find a way out, but a man's hand from behind gripped her arm and forced her down. "Let go!" she shouted, voice trembling and lost in the cold air. Sharaban only hissed through clenched teeth, her voice raw and twisted. "You have to die in my place." They drove the knife in again and again, brutal, relentless. The thin fabric of her dress tore, skin split, each thrust coming with its own frenzied rhythm. Khadidja writhed, growing weaker. Her breath shortened into hoarse gasps. All resistance drained away into the warm tide of blood spreading over the earth. The sky above blurred into a wash of leaves, clouds, and faint, distant headlight glow. In those last moments, she perhaps still did not understand why the woman who had once smiled at her had become the one to take her life. When the sounds finally died, Sharaban stood there, breathing hard, her hands trembling around the knife, its blade coated in blood. Below her, Khadidja lay motionless, black hair matted with red, eyes wide and staring at the sky, their light gone. The forest around them fell into an eerie hush. Only the dry rustle of leaves and the ragged breaths of the two figures who had crossed, in that night, the thin line between human and something else. They dragged the body toward the car, clumsy, heavy, leaving a blurred trail of blood across the dirt. Sharaban opened the back door, shoved the lifeless form inside, and slammed it shut. The leather seats were smeared with dark, spreading stains. Wordlessly, she slipped off her coat and tossed it into the back seat. Then, reaching into her bag, she pulled out a few personal items and placed them beside the body, as if arranging a scene, crafting a story. When she was done, Shakir glanced at his watch. The hands pointed close to 10. "Let's go," he muttered. Sharaban slid behind the wheel, her hands trembling but her eyes utterly cold. She started the engine, headlights flaring to life, sweeping over the bloodied ground before disappearing into the darkness. The Mercedes sped off, leaving behind a silent forest, wet earth glistening under the pale moonlight. The wind stirring softly through the trees, as if trying to conceal a secret no one was meant to find. Sharaban and Shakir drove eastward through the sleeping highways, their car gliding under pools of amber streetlight. The night stretched endlessly ahead, until the faint silhouette of Ingolstadt appeared, the city shimmering along the Danube like a thin streak of gold, a smear of lipstick across the mouth of darkness. They turned off toward a quiet riverside neighborhood, down a narrow street shaded by old trees. Here, the city's noise seemed swallowed by an unnatural hush. Under the cover of a broad, whispering canopy, they parked the car, two figures frozen in the aftermath of something unspeakably cold. The body lay in the back seat, hastily covered with a coat. Beneath the fabric, the ruined face was barely visible, the long black hair falling like a funeral veil. The warm metallic scent of blood clung to the leather, thick and unmistakable, heavy enough that anyone passing by might have sensed it. But the night kept its secrets well. Darkness forgave what daylight never could. Sharaban reached into her bag and carefully arranged a few of her own belongings beside the corpse, like a stage designer perfecting the scene of a play. A handbag tipped on its side, a scarf knotted loosely, a single earring left by the seat corner, small, deliberate fragments meant to deceive the casual eye. But they could not silence the truth that lingered in the air, the faint, rhythmic tick of her own heartbeat, loud against the suffocating quiet, as if time itself was counting down to discovery. The scream of truth. Sharaban had told her parents she was going to Ingolstadt to settle a family matter, a phrase that sounded so plausible it was almost terrifying. It was both shield and bait, designed to steer suspicion toward an old conflict, diverting every doubt away from what really lay behind the curtain. A calculated exchange of identities. They wiped the car's handles, removing any trace of fingerprints. They dabbed at the edge of the seat to blur a streak of blood. Then, without another word, they melted into the darkness like two shadows that had never existed, believing their perfect performance would lull every watching eye back to sleep. The car door shut softly. Footsteps faded into the still night, and the small riverside city went on breathing, as if nothing had changed. But once a secret is planted, it never truly rests. The light of truth, even as thin as a single thread, always finds a way to slip through the cracks. They left behind a silent Mercedes, the metallic tang of blood still lingering inside, scattered belongings arranged like props from a scene too carefully staged. Above it all, the night of Ingolstadt swallowed every trace, every echo of horror for now. And in the houses nearby, as the last glasses from dinner clinked and the last drunks drifted toward uneasy sleep, a question began to form. Quiet, haunting, inescapable. Late at night, on the 16th of August, 2022, inside a small apartment in Munich, the air had grown thick with unease. Sharaban K's parents paced back and forth across the living room, the dim yellow light casting deep lines across their worried faces. According to what she'd told them earlier that afternoon, Sharaban was only driving to Ingolstadt to meet her ex-husband for a private conversation. She had promised she'd be back the same day. But now, it was far past midnight. Their calls went unanswered. Their messages remained unread. The mother began to feel a sinking dread, an instinctive certainty that something was wrong. The father, struggling to stay composed, tried to reassure himself. Maybe the car had broken down, maybe they had argued, and she needed time to cool off. But with every unanswered ring, silence grew heavier, pressing against the walls like an unseen weight. Finally, after a long pause, they decided to go look for her. The Bavarian night was damp and eerily still. The highway shimmered under the pale beams of their headlights, the trees on either side swaying restlessly in the wind. The hum of the engine mixed with the hollow roar of the air rushing past. Every time the phone rang and no one picked up, the mother trembled. They didn't know it yet, but only a few dozen kilometers away, fate had already sealed a tragedy that no one could undo. Near midnight, their car turned onto a narrow road by the Danube. The river lay still as glass, reflecting the hazy glow of their headlights. Then, the father pressed the brake gently. "There," he whispered. Under a large oak tree stood Sharaban's familiar light-colored Mercedes, motionless, silent. The interior light was still on. That dim, Flickering glow froze the air around them. The mother's heart clenched. Her trembling hand gripped her husband's arm. Together, they hurried toward the car, each step heavy, sinking into the thickness of the night. Through the fogged window, they could make out the outline of a woman slumped across the back seat. Long black hair spilled over her shoulders. Her hands hung limply by her side. The mother's voice broke into a desperate whisper. "Sharaban, what happened to you?" No answer. Only the faint yellow light inside the car, and beneath it, a face smeared with blood. In a panic, the mother yanked the door handle. It gave way with a metallic click. And in that instant, under the cold light, the silence, the smell of iron and rain, they were pulled into a nightmare that no parent should ever see. On the back seat lay the body of a young woman, soaked in blood. Her white blouse was stained red, her neck and chest slashed with deep, gaping wounds. The victim's face had been destroyed beyond recognition. The metallic scent of blood filled the air, making the mother dizzy. She let out a raw, heart-splitting scream and collapsed to the ground, clutching her chest and calling her daughter's name in despair. The father stood frozen, stunned into silence for a few seconds before snapping back to life. He fumbled for his phone, voice trembling as he called emergency services, choking on every word. Somewhere deep inside, he still clung to a faint, irrational hope that his daughter had only fainted, that she could still be saved. But the cold body before him, the familiar hair and build, answered that hope with silence. They believed Sharaban was dead, believed their daughter had been brutally murdered by some faceless monster in the night. While waiting for police, the couple knelt beside the car, crying uncontrollably, their shaking hands brushing the lifeless arm of the body inside. Everything seemed to match: the jeans, the sneakers, the long black hair. Only the face was gone, mangled beyond belief. The father lifted his gaze toward the ink-black sky, the Danube flowing silently in the distance. No sound broke the stillness except the wails of two souls stripped bare, echoing through the quiet as if calling from another world. That night, Ingolstadt bore witness to the beginning of a horrifying mystery when the victim was identified not by evidence, but by the desperate, grieving hearts of her parents. Moments later, the wail of sirens tore through the night along the banks of the Danube. Blue and red lights flashed over the cold water, sweeping across the trembling trees. The quiet riverside neighborhood became the epicenter of chaos. Ingolstadt police arrived swiftly, setting up portable floodlights and yellow tape to seal off the area. Under the artificial glare, the silver Mercedes gleamed faintly, a silent witness to unspeakable violence. An ambulance pulled up, and two paramedics approached the car. They opened the door and leaned in to check for a pulse. A few seconds passed heavy, wordless, then one of them gave a small shake of the head. The young woman had been dead for hours. The estimated time of death matched the exact evening when Sharaban's family had lost contact with her. A white sheet was drawn gently over the bloodied body, only a few strands of long black hair slipping out from beneath it, wet, matted, clinging together like the remnants of a forgotten life. Beside the car, the mother buried her face in her husband's shoulder, her body shaking uncontrollably. The father stood motionless, his trembling hand gripping the edge of the white sheet as if afraid that letting go would mean losing his daughter all over again. Investigators began their work, methodically photographing, measuring, recording every trace. They found bloodstains on the ground, a few personal items, a handbag, a coat, all matching those known to belong to Sharaban K. The victim's phone was missing, as were her identification papers. Pending forensic results, police made a preliminary identification: Sharaban K, 23 years old, registered owner of the Mercedes, confirmed by her parents. Everything fit: the car, the belongings, the clothes, the long black hair, even the body type. Only the face was unrecognizable, mutilated almost beyond existence. But in that moment of unbearable grief, no one had the clarity or the courage to question it. When questioned, Sharaban's parents recounted what little they knew. Their daughter had told them she was going to Ingolstadt to meet her ex-husband for a private discussion, then vanished. That single detail immediately shaped the direction of the investigation. To the officers, it resembled a familiar pattern, a possible crime of passion, or a domestic dispute turned violent. The ex-husband was quickly identified as the primary suspect. A special unit was dispatched in the middle of the night to locate and question him, while forensic personnel transported the body to the city morgue. There, in the early hours of the following morning, the autopsy would begin, and with it, the first cracks would appear in the illusion that had fooled everyone. Before leaving the scene, the father approached a young police officer. His eyes were sunken, his voice hoarse from crying. "Please," he whispered, barely holding himself together. "Find whoever did this to my daughter." The officer could only nod, the quiet promise lost in the wind. That night, Ingolstadt did not sleep. Local news outlets began reporting on the brutal murder of a young woman found dead in her car. The story spread quickly, the public whispering about jealousy, revenge, and domestic violence. It all seemed so clear, so ordinary in its horror, until the truth began to surface. Because the woman lying beneath that white sheet, the one everyone believed was Sharaban K, was not her. And when the truth emerged, it would send shivers through all of Germany. By the morning of the 17th of August 2022, the crime scene on the outskirts of Ingolstadt lay under a dull, gray sky. Yellow police tape stretched across the dirt road leading into the forest. The wind from the Danube rustled through the leaves, carrying the faint, bitter blend of metal and engine oil that still hung in the air. German investigators had been on site since dawn, scouring every inch of ground where the Mercedes had been found, searching for footprints, blood traces, fibers, or anything that could retell the night's story. Overhead, a drone camera hovered slowly above the scene. On the ground, forensic technicians in white protective suits crouched close to the dirt, collecting every strand of hair, every dried smear of blood. The case was immediately classified as particularly severe homicide, not only because of the savagery of the act, but because something about it, something hidden beneath its surface, felt far more complex than an ordinary murder. It was as if the crime itself was just the surface of a labyrinth, and what lay beneath was darker than anyone dared imagine. Inside the briefing room of the Ingolstadt police headquarters, investigators laid out the case files. The victim was believed to be Sharaban K, 23 years old, the registered owner of the Mercedes. All the initial evidence pointed squarely toward that conclusion. Her parents had confirmed the identification, the timing, the clothes, the hair, even the shoes, everything matched. Their statements further reinforced the narrative. Sharaban had said she was driving to Ingolstadt to meet her ex-husband, and then lost contact. Following protocol and instinct, the detectives focused immediately on the ex-husband, a familiar pattern in homicide investigations. It fit the textbook scenario of a domestic conflict turned deadly. A task force was dispatched overnight to interrogate him, seize his phone, and verify his movements. But when questioned, the man appeared genuinely stunned. He denied having arranged any meeting with Sharaban, insisting that he hadn't spoken to or seen her in months. That night, he said, he had been at home several hundred kilometers away from Ingolstadt. His alibi was solid, backed by phone location data and independent witnesses. That was the first crack in the story. If Sharaban hadn't gone to meet her ex-husband, where had she really gone? Had she lied to her parents not to protect herself, but to hide something else entirely? The possibility began to dawn on the team. The version of events they had been given might not be the truth at all, but the opening line of a deception meticulously written by the very person they believed was dead. By late afternoon that same day, when the preliminary autopsy report arrived, the entire case detonated like a bomb. Forensic examiners had uncovered several inconsistencies that didn't match Sharaban K. A tattoo on the left arm, a small scar on the shoulder, a different style of ear piercing. Even the dental records didn't align. Then the DNA results confirmed the unthinkable. The body in the car was not Sharaban K. It belonged to Khadidja O, 23 years old, an Algerian-born woman living nearly 300 kilometers away, in Heilbronn. The investigation room fell into silence. The woman everyone thought was the victim was actually the replacement, and Sharaban, the woman believed to be dead, had now vanished without a trace. Was she alive? On the run? Or hiding somewhere, waiting for the chaos to unfold? The parallels were chilling. Two women, same age, same profession, eerily similar looks. It couldn't be coincidence. Detectives immediately shifted direction. Missing persons records were reviewed, and soon Khadidja's friends in Heilbronn confirmed that she had disappeared on August 16, after telling them she was going to meet a cosmetics partner. She had never said the partner's name. The threads began to cross: one missing woman, one staged death, one body swapped. Slowly, a pattern emerged. A deception meticulously planned, down to the last horrifying detail. They traced Sharaban's phone signal, pulling data from multiple cell towers and cross-referencing it with dozens of traffic cameras around Ingolstadt. Hours of footage were reviewed frame by frame until one detail froze everyone in the room. On surveillance video from a small pizzeria on the afternoon of August 17, investigators spotted a couple, a young man of Balkan descent and a woman whose face was unmistakably Sharaban's. The two sat calmly at a corner table, eating, drinking, and chatting, as though nothing in the world was wrong. That calmness, that eerie normalcy was what gave them away. Police quietly surrounded the area, watching from unmarked cars. At 5:45 p.m., just as the pair stepped out of the pizzeria, a special operations team moved in. Within seconds, Sharaban K and Shakir K were on the ground, handcuffed, under the stunned gaze of diners who had stopped mid-bite. The arrest warrant was executed immediately. The charge: suspicion of premeditated murder. From that moment, the case, once known as the murder of Sharaban K, was officially renamed the Ingolstadt body double murder. It would soon grip all of Germany, not just for its brutality, but for the monstrous logic behind it. A woman killed another simply because she looked like her. When police stormed the pizzeria in Ingolstadt on the afternoon of August 17, Sharaban K looked up in confusion, her expression blank for a heartbeat, before she saw the drawn weapons and heard the sharp command, "Polizei." She froze. Then came the tears, her body shaking as she stammered incoherently. The confidence she once flaunted in her beauty videos was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling face and wrists swiftly locked in steel. Beside her, Shakir K, her 5-year-old boyfriend of Kosovar origin, muscular, with a long tattoo down his arm, seemed more composed, though the shock in his eyes betrayed him. He didn't resist. He simply lowered his head as they were led outside, the flickering police lights painting their faces in cold blue and red. At the station, Sharaban tried to twist the narrative. She claimed she was a victim, too, insisting that someone had kidnapped her and forced her into the crime, that the body in the car had nothing to do with her. She cried, trembled, and pleaded, but the seasoned investigators weren't moved. Shakir, on the other hand, offered evasive half-truths. He said he didn't know who Khadidja was, that he had merely driven with Sharaban that evening and gone home, that it was all a misunderstanding. Yet, with every question, their stories unraveled further. There were no signs of abduction, no injuries, no threats, nothing to support their tale. The evidence, however, was undeniable. Blood traces in the Mercedes, DNA on the back seat, and cell tower data all converged on the same chilling conclusion. It was Sharaban and Shakir who had driven to the forest that night, and from there carried a lifeless body into Ingolstadt. On the 19th of August, 2022, after 2 days of intense questioning, Ingolstadt police officially detained Sharaban K and Shakir K for investigation. That was when the story erupted across Germany's media landscape. Major newspapers blazed with a single headline: "The Doppelganger Murder." A young woman killed simply because she looked like her killer. It sounded like fiction, yet it was horrifyingly real, unfolding in the heart of modern Germany. The news spread at lightning speed, leaving the public stunned and unsettled. Photos of Sharaban and Khadidja appeared side by side on every front page. The resemblance was so uncanny that even strangers felt a chill run through them, as though they were staring at the same face, divided by a line of life and death. At the Ingolstadt police headquarters, spokesman Andreas Icelli admitted to the press, "We've never seen a case like this. The twist was extraordinary. On the day the body was found, no one imagined the identity would turn out to be the reverse of what we believed. What had started as a seemingly straightforward homicide had now become a labyrinth, a maze of deceit, obsession, and calculation so deliberate it blurred the boundary between victim and perpetrator." The investigation quickly shifted toward reconstructing the entire sequence of the crime. Every clue, blood traces in the car, Instagram messages, surveillance footage, and the Mercedes GPS route was cross-checked hour by hour. The evidence aligned too perfectly to allow for any defense. The car belonged to Sharaban. The DNA of both suspects was found throughout the vehicle, and Khadidja's phone was discovered in Sharaban's handbag at the time of her arrest. The facade of Sharaban as a victim collapsed instantly. The image of a beautiful young woman who once dreamed of becoming a social media star was now replaced by that of a cold, calculating killer, one who had planned, step by step, to stage her own death. As for Shakir, his past criminal record, theft and assault, now painted him as the willing accomplice, the second hand behind the bloody performance. This was no longer just a murder case. It had become a mirror held up to the darkest corners of modern identity, an age where lives can be fabricated, faces can be swapped, and the hunger for recognition or escape can drive someone to erase their own existence. And from here, the long unraveling of the Sharaban K deception was only beginning. Inside the Ingolstadt detention center, Sharaban K initially appeared unusually composed, defiant, even calm. She insisted she was innocent, claiming to be a victim herself in a mysterious kidnapping, saying that both she and Khadidja had been held captive, but that she had somehow managed to escape. That story unraveled almost immediately. Investigators recovered Instagram records proving that Sharaban had used multiple fake accounts to contact Khadidja and dozens of other women, all of whom shared strikingly similar features: dark hair, olive skin, Middle Eastern looks. Digital forensics traced the web of messages, location data, and dummy accounts she had created in the weeks leading up to the murder. The pattern was undeniable. This had been meticulously planned. Confronted with the evidence, Sharaban fell silent. Her posture slumped, her gaze hollow, as though she finally understood that every lie had reached its end. Meanwhile, Shakir K, her Kosovar boyfriend, with a prior record for theft and assault, began to talk after several days in isolation. His confession came slowly, fragmented half-truth, half-excuse. He admitted being present at the scene, but pushed all blame onto Sharaban, claiming he only did it because I loved her too much. He told investigators that Sharaban had lied to her parents about meeting her ex-husband to create an alibi, and that she had drawn him into the plan with the promise, "After this, we'll disappear together." Tearfully, he claimed jealousy and fear had driven him to help cover up the killing, that he hadn't meant for things to go so far. His words dripped with self-preservation, but they gave investigators the missing framework they needed. The picture was now clear. Sharaban was the mastermind. Shakir was the accomplice, the second instrument in her calculated, blood-soaked charade. When police searched their apartment, the last pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Inside a trash bin, investigators found clothes stained with Khadidja's blood, along with a handwritten list of Instagram accounts belonging to women Sharaban had contacted, all resembling her. The messages were still there: polite offers of collaboration, invitations to meet, promises of free beauty products. Several of the women later confirmed that Sharaban had approached them online with suspiciously generous proposals, but they had declined. Khadidja, tragically, had not. She was simply the one who said yes. Then came another revelation, one that stripped away any lingering illusion of innocence. Months before the murder, Sharaban had allegedly tried to hire a hitman to kill her own brother-in-law over a family dispute. The plot collapsed only because the would-be assassin vanished after taking the money. Even behind bars, the couple's ruthlessness didn't stop. Shakir was caught, attempting to orchestrate another crime from inside the jail, plotting to eliminate key witnesses by passing their names through another inmate to contacts outside. The plan was exposed when the inmate turned the note over to prison staff. As a result, Shakir faced a new charge of solicitation to commit murder. By the end of January 2023, after 6 months of investigation, the Ingolstadt Public Prosecutor's Office formally charged Sharaban K and Shakir K with premeditated murder. Prosecutor Veronica Grieser delivered the statement that defined the case. Sharaban K killed the victim to fake her own death and escape personal conflicts within her family. That single sentence closed every remaining doubt. The motive was as chilling as it was absurd: to run away from her life by stealing another woman's. The body of Khadidja O was released to her father, a quiet man who brought his daughter home to Algeria for burial, closing a journey steeped in grief. On social media, her friends reposted her bright, smiling photos with messages that read, "We will never forget your kind heart." A gentle girl had died for no reason other than the face she was born with, and Germany had never seen a crime so senselessly cruel. When the final forensic report was released, the nation seemed to hold its breath. The findings described a horror almost beyond comprehension: between 50 and 60 stab wounds across the body, concentrated on the chest, abdomen, and most viciously her face. 2 fatal thrusts pierced her heart and lung, causing rapid death from massive blood loss. But the countless slashes across her features told a different story. This was not just murder, it was erasure. The killer had wanted to obliterate the victim's identity, to make the beautiful face unrecognizable, faceless. Forensic specialists called it one of the most cold-blooded attacks they had ever examined. Every wound was deliberate, measured not the product of panic, but of calculation and control. On both of Khadidja's forearms, examiners found small cuts and bruises, defensive wounds, evidence of her desperate attempt to fight back, to shield herself from the onslaught in the dark forest. There were no signs of sexual assault or restraint. The sole intent had been to kill, not to violate. The final report concluded: Khadidja had been ambushed without warning, given no chance to scream or flee. Death had come swiftly, but before it, she had known fear so absolute that words could never capture it. Following Shakir's confession, investigators traced the route between Heilbronn and Ingolstadt, searching a stretch of forest he had mentioned. What they found there confirmed their worst fears. Deep patches of soil soaked with dried blood, fallen leaves stained dark red, and several strands of hair, later matched by DNA to Khadidja O. It was undeniable this was the true crime scene. The Mercedes had never been the place of murder. It was merely the stage, the set piece where Sharaban had carefully choreographed her false death. The murder weapon, a knife, was never recovered. Detectives believe it was thrown into the Danube River as the killers fled, swallowed forever by the current. Another piece of damning evidence was Khadidja's phone, found inside Sharaban's handbag during her arrest. Its final conversation revealed the last message ever sent to the victim from Sharabi, the fake Instagram account Sharaban had used to lure her in. When the investigators pieced everything together, a chilling picture emerged, a crime both absurd and monstrous in its precision. Driven by the desire to vanish from her own life and fake her death, Sharaban K had searched online for someone who looked like her, a mirror image. When she found Khadidja, she drew her into a trap, led her into the forest, and murdered her, then staged the body inside her own car to convince the world that she was the one who had died. If not for the diligence of the forensic team, the plan might have succeeded. An innocent woman would have been buried under the wrong name, and the real killer would have walked free, reborn under a false identity. But truth, as it always does, clawed its way back to the surface through blood, data, and the persistence of those who refused to accept appearances. When the DNA results were made public, Germany recoiled in collective outrage and sorrow. News outlets filled with disbelief, and social media mourned a stranger whose only crime was resemblance. Khadidja O, gentle, kind, and full of promise, had become the face of misplaced trust, a tragic symbol of an age where social media can connect hearts or lead them straight into darkness. What chilled Germany to the core about the case was not only the savagery of the act, but the distorted psychology hidden behind Sharaban K. Ordinary facade, a 24-year-old woman once seen as beautiful, educated, and professional in the beauty industry. From an investigative standpoint, her motive stemmed not from revenge or greed, but from something far darker, a pathological desire to disappear, to be reborn under another identity, no matter the cost. After the collapse of her marriage, Sharaban's life spiraled into despair. Born into a Yazidi Iraqi family, a minority community that places immense value on female honor and purity, an unofficial divorce was viewed as disgrace. She lost her husband, her job, and became suffocated by the judgmental gaze of her relatives and in-laws. In that emotional breakdown, Sharaban began to see death as escape, not redemption, but reinvention. And instead of seeking peace, she chose to manufacture her own death by ending someone else's. It was the precise moment when the boundary between despair and evil vanished. Once the decision was made, her demeanor turned calculating, almost mechanical. She scoured social media for women who resembled her, as if shopping for a replacement face. The long list of targets she compiled became proof of her cold-blooded intent. To Sharaban, Khadidja was never a person, only a vessel, a mask that could let her vanish from the shame she imagined surrounded her. There was no hatred, no greed, only pure, predatory selfishness and an obsession with liberation through self-erasure. Another element that crept into the case was jealousy. Sharaban had once tried her hand at becoming a beauty blogger, but failed. She watched Khadidja, the same age, sharing the same passion, thrive, succeed, and earn admiration, and something inside her began to twist with envy and desire. She chose Khadidja not only because they looked alike, but because she wanted to destroy what she herself could never become. On a deeper level, the murder was a symbolic act of self-destruction, killing her own reflection to be reborn under a new identity. As for Sharaban K, her Kosovar boyfriend with a criminal record, he was the perfect piece of the puzzle. He loved Sharaban blindly, carried a violent temper, and was easily provoked. She lied to him, saying she would meet her ex-husband. Igniting his jealousy, then skillfully turned that jealousy into a weapon, pulling him into the crime. Shakir became the executioner, the hand of violence, while Sharaban remained the calculating mind behind it all. When arrested, he tried to justify the killing with a single chilling line: "I was afraid of being exposed." That bare confession revealed everything two people willing to take an innocent life, not for love, not for money, but simply to protect themselves. The pair existed as reflections of one another. Sharaban, intelligent but morally warped, and Shakir, violent yet easily controlled. Together, they formed a perfect mechanism for murder, one to think, the other to act, both driven by the same mix of obsession and selfishness. That's why the doppelganger murder was never just the story of a single death. It became a symbol of moral collapse in an age where identity itself can be copied, swapped, or erased with just a few clicks. Sharaban turned social media into a weapon, a digital trap of death, twisting human trust into an instrument of deception. Khadidja O became a tragic testament to a chilling reality. In the virtual world, you can be killed simply because your face resembles someone else's. And when a person like Sharaban chooses to fake her own death by committing murder, the line between victim and killer, between despair and pure evil, ceases to exist. After more than a year of intense investigation, the case of Sharaban K and Shakir K for the murder of Khadidja O entered its final stage, a public trial at the Ingolstadt court in Bavaria. Beginning in August 2023, the proceedings stretched over 11 months, spanning more than 50 hearings that captured the attention of all Germany, and soon, the world. This was no ordinary murder trial. It was the story of a terrifying exchange of identities, where the killer was once believed to be the victim. Defendant Sharaban K, 24, was charged with premeditated murder and solicitation to commit murder, stemming from her earlier attempt to hire a hitman to kill her brother-in-law. Beside her sat Shakir K, 25, her Kosovar boyfriend, facing charges of murder and incitement to murder for plotting to eliminate witnesses while in prison. Both appeared in court, dressed in dark prison attire, the courtroom lights casting stark shadows on their pale faces, no makeup, no trace of the online confidence they once flaunted. In the early days of the trial, Sharaban remained silent, her face expressionless, occasionally whispering to her lawyer. Shakir, in contrast, seemed restless, his bloodshot eyes downcast, especially when he caught sight of Khadidja's father, a weary, middle-aged man who attended every session, clutching a framed photograph of his daughter. On the evidence table lay photos that froze the courtroom into silence. The crime scene, the victim's body, and the Instagram messages Sharaban had used to lure Khadidja to her death. Prosecutor Veronica Grieser presented a meticulous case, supported by forensic, digital, and witness evidence. She emphasized the exceptional cruelty and premeditation of the act, a murder planned with chilling precision and driven by pure, self-serving malice. A parade of witnesses followed. Young women Sharaban had previously contacted, forensic experts detailing the wounds, and detectives recounting the long, painstaking investigation. Each testimony was another blade cutting through the web of deceit Sharaban had so carefully spun. When it came time for her own defense, Sharaban broke down in tears, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I was desperate. I had no way out." But the prosecutor struck back sharply. If she were truly desperate, she couldn't have planned every step, creating fake accounts, luring the victim, staging the scene like a director. This was calculation, not loss of control. The court rejected all claims for leniency based on mental instability. As for Shakir, his lawyer tried to distance him from the role of mastermind, blaming it on blind love. Yet the evidence told another story. He wasn't merely an accomplice. He had gone on to plot the murder of witnesses while in custody, revealing his deeply dangerous nature. On the 19th of December 2024, the courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Sharaban K and Shakir K were sentenced to life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole after 15 years, the harshest penalty under German law for crimes of particular gravity. Sharaban stood motionless, her lips quivering, eyes wide, as if unable to comprehend that her life had come to this. Shakir screamed in protest, thrashing as officers restrained and escorted him away. From the back row, Khadidja's father wept, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. The interpreter beside him placed a hand on his arm, unable to find words. As the hearing ended, the last light of day spilled through the courtroom windows, catching the photo of Khadidja in her father's hands, her smile still radiant, untouched by the darkness that had taken her. Justice had come late, but complete. Sharaban had sought to fake her death, to start anew. But in the end, she had only buried herself, condemned to a real death of another kind. A lifetime behind bars, traded for the soul of an innocent girl she destroyed. The story of Sharaban K stands as a chilling reflection of how envy, hatred, and despair can slowly erode a person's humanity. A young woman who once lived an ordinary life with dreams, with a future, was ultimately consumed by her own toxic emotions until she crossed the invisible line between good and evil. Sharaban was not born a killer, but when jealousy and shame began to dominate her mind, she allowed herself to become one. The most terrifying part of her story is not the cunning of her plan, but the silent descent, the way evil takes root quietly, growing from small wounds left untended. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We never truly know the people beside us. A kind face, a soft voice, none of these guarantee kindness of heart. Sharaban was once described as polite, elegant, and passionate about beauty. Yet behind that carefully crafted image hid a darkness with no bottom. The death of Khadidja O is a grim warning for our digital age, a time when social media can turn fragile connections into deadly traps. Trust, when placed in the wrong hands, can become the very blade that cuts us. And yet, the outcome of this case also stands as proof that justice never sleeps. No matter how perfect Sharaban's plan seemed, no matter how deeply she believed she could erase her past and live under a new name, the truth still found its way back to the light. German law proved what should never be forgotten. No perpetrator escapes the weight of their actions. The verdict could not bring Khadidja back, but it delivered the one thing still possible: a measure of justice, a quiet comfort for a grieving father, and a reminder to us all that though justice may come late, it always comes. Thank you all for staying with this story until the very end, an unsettling journey where every detail blurs the line between humanity and monstrosity. Through the tragedy of Khadidja O, may we learn to look inward, to protect our compassion, to stay vigilant in a digital world full of illusions, and to remember that sometimes a single moment of envy or despair can lead us into an abyss from which there is no return. Justice has been served, but the lessons it leaves behind remain, about trust, awareness, and the value of a kind heart. Because in a world where identities can be faked and lives can be stolen, it is empathy, not ambition, that keeps us human.